I just was asked to give you sort of a short overview of what is just happening in the United States, what is a primary, what is a caucus, and what happened yesterday on Super Tuesday and why is Super Tuesday super even. So what is happening is that the Republican candidates try to tour the country to try to summon delegates. The nominee needs about 1,144 delegates to become officially the nominee. There's two different systems that are in place. One is primary, that's the standard. The polls are open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. You go there on a Tuesday, you check a box, you go home. And then there's the caucus, which is a little more sort of basic democracy, I want to say. It happens in the evening. It's a gathering of, a town hall basically. People meet in churches and schools, etc., and they divide themselves up into corners. And there's a Romney corner and a Gingrich corner and a Santorum corner, right? And then the candidate who has below 15% usually has to dissolve its group. So, and that's where the fun starts. So these people that are now independents have to be won over by these other corners, physically as well as rhetorically. And there are some more slight differences. There are open primaries, meaning everyone can vote. There are closed primaries, meaning that only party members can vote. But these are sort of the two general ways to get delegates. Usually caucuses have a much lower turnout, which means that it's easier to persuade people if you have a good organization on the ground. That happened in Iowa, for example, beginning of January, where Santorum had a lot of people on the ground and managed to upset or managed to actually win the caucus, despite the first reports had Romney up, but in the end Santorum won. Let's take a quick look at the sort of the actors, the protagonists. There's first Newt Gingrich. He was the former Speaker of the House of Representatives in the mid-90s. He's famous for standing against Bill Clinton in the government shutdown of the mid-90s. Different than in Austria when the president and the Congress don't agree on a budget. It's not just, in Austria the last budget would just continue through the next year. That doesn't happen in the US. In the US there's just no money. So the government has to shut down all employees, all benefits, welfare can't be paid. Gingrich was the last one to provoke that kind of shutdown. He's conservative, yet still sometimes he's an ally with Democrats when it comes to education reform. He just did a tour with former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So he's very, it's hard to pin him in a way. Then there's Ron Paul. He's a former congressman from Texas who is not actually a Republican but more of a libertarian with sort of social conservative views. Libertarians, the basic thought of libertarians is government should have a very small role in sort of managing society, which can be applied to both sides economically when it comes to government regulation of businesses, of environmental standards, etc., but also socially when it comes to LGBT rights, pro-choice. These could all be things where libertarians say government doesn't have a say in it. With Ron Paul, excuse me, he's fiscally libertarian, so he's against government regulations on and pro-business, but he's socially conservative, meaning he's also against choice and against LGBT rights. The real big question is, and I'd love to discuss that with you afterwards, is when will he drop out? Because there's no chance that he's going to snag the nomination, yet he's still in the race, and the question is, what does he want and what is his agenda? I checked, in 2008, he dropped out of the race almost 4 months after McCain was the presumptive nominee, so he likes to drag it along. Next up is Rick Santorum. He's a senator from Pennsylvania. He's very conservative, and I think his sort of worldview is best described in a quote. From him, he says, "I believe and I think the right approach is to accept this horribly created, in the sense of rape, but nevertheless a gift in a very broken way, the gift of human life, and accept what God has given you." So what he's saying in many words is that pregnancy through rape is God's gift. And I think that sums up his sort of religious position very well. And lastly, there's Mitt Romney. He was the governor of Massachusetts. He is known to be a flip-flopper, meaning he has been on the sides of both sides of almost all issues. His biggest problem right now is Bain Capital, a firm he invested in. He was the CEO of, that sort of that bought out a lot of companies throughout the United States and fired people, and that doesn't fit well with the sort of job creator image that he's trying to persuade. He also has a problem with being out of touch. There's some quotes by him. He said to a bunch of unemployed people, "I'm also unemployed." Then he said, "Corporations are people." He made, in a Republican TV debate, he made a $10,000 bet, wanted to make one, with Rick Perry. He says he likes being able to fire people. When he was asked about his income in the last year, he said that most of his wealth is from venture capital, but he also had some speaker fee, but that wasn't that much. It turned out to be $300,000. He says he's not very concerned. Excuse me?
Peanuts.
Yeah, right. He also didn't pay any taxes for them, or barely any taxes for it. He said he's not concerned with the very poor because they have a safety net. And then he always tries to be very folksy. So, for example, when he was in Michigan last Tuesday, the elections were in Michigan. He said he's supporting the American automotive industry, and the whole family drives Cadillac. In fact, his wife drives a couple of Cadillacs. And then he went to see a NASCAR race, also something very American. And when he was asked if he follows NASCAR closely, he said, "Well, not as much as he could, but he has a lot of friends who own NASCAR teams." So that's sort of, you might think he has a problem with one-liners, but in fact, he has a problem with being out of touch, and he has a problem with appealing to the American, middle class in a way, even though he tries hard. What happened so far is this, in a sort of poll over the last year, and it makes a little more sense this way. So first there was Romney before the primaries even started. Last spring, Romney was leading in the polls. Then Perry, the governor of Texas, jumped in a race, was sort of seen as the alternative, the conservative alternative to Romney for a bit, but then he struggled in the debates and he dived down again in the polls. Then Herman Cain tried to make it. He stumbled over some sex scandals, so he was out. Then Newt Gingrich was the front runner for a while, and you see sort of Romney is basically stable, and he always leads when someone else is losing. Gingrich was the front runner twice. In between, it was Romney again. Then it was Santorum. Now it's Romney again. So it goes up and down, and what the graph, shows best is that everyone knows it's going to be Romney in the end, or at least that's sort of what the pundits agreed on. Everyone knows, but the Republican base isn't quite happy with him, and they are trying to find an alternative, and they're trying to find an alternative in all directions. So that also is what Super Tuesday showed, where yes, Mitt Romney won. Yes, Mitt Romney won most of the states, most of the delegates, but he couldn't, manage to distance himself from the field so much. In Ohio, he only had a 12,000 lead, 12,000 vote lead, which compared to 1.2 million voters isn't a lot. He barely. He won everything else single-handedly, but he still, he can't blow out the other candidates. And one problem we'll have to talk about is that sort of because the delegate count is so high, 1,144, there's no way to get over the finish line quickly. I think the delegates are in place only by end of March. So it's got to be really hard to just go over this finish line and say, okay, I've got my nominees. In fact, the primary will be over not if someone crosses that finish line, but if everyone else has dropped out. And right now it doesn't seem that anyone is dropping out. On the other hand, there's Barack Obama, who sort of looks at the United States from a different perspective. There's 270 delegates he has to, electoral votes he has to get. He starts off with a baseline of John Kerry's map, because his thought is if these states were even won by Kerry, then he's gonna manage to win them as well. From then, he has sort of different pathways to get to the 270. There's the western path, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada plus Iowa would get him over 70. There's Florida, that state would single-handedly get him over to 70. There's the South, North Carolina, Virginia. That's especially interesting because Virginia has been a swing state on the state level, but almost never on national level. It has been Republican since, I think the last Democratic candidate, or the last Democratic president was LBJ before Obama was elected in Virginia. So it leans Republican, but there's all of these northern states. There's Washington, D.C., and there's Maryland, and there's all of New Mexico, and all these volunteers don't have anywhere to go. These are safe Democratic states. So Virginia is a border state where they can just flood Virginia with volunteers to try to snag Virginia. There's the Midwest strategy, Ohio and Iowa. There's new would be on the map Arizona, because John McCain was there 2008, so it was obviously not a battleground. But Obama actually came quite close, and he might snag Arizona this time. And in fact, these are going to be the states that on November 6th are going to be the states to have a look at. So there's not going to be one path, but it's going to be an all-of-the-above approach. So what's happening next? Next up is the Deep South. That's a problem for Mitt Romney because he couldn't, have a final blowout. He's gonna have to drag it along at least for another 3 weeks. There's Alabama up next, and I believe Oklahoma. No, Oklahoma was this Tuesday. But there's like 3 or so southern states that are the next big prizes. And in the end, it's gonna be August 27th. The Republican convention starts. That's where it's gonna be over for sure. So the questions I want to sort of start the discussion with would be when and if Paul and Gingrich drop out, and also Rick Santorum drops out. But if there are any sort of technical questions first, maybe we'll grab the audience for a second. Was sort of the that was Poli-Sci 101 in like 10 minutes, so I understand that there might be confusion. if you have any quick questions in between.